will be recorded. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris Osgood, who will kick us off.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I'm Chris Osgood. I have the honor of serving as Mayor Wu's Senior Advisor for Infrastructure and the great pleasure of welcoming you to this meeting on behalf of Chief Mariama White-Hammond, Commissioner Allison Brizius, Chief Arthur Jemison, Rich McGinnis, and the entire BPDA Environment Department City team. And most importantly, on behalf of Mayor Wu, I want to thank all of you, not just for joining us this morning, but for being our partners and advocates for Climate Ready Boston. Over the next 2 hours, we hope to do 3 things. First, we'll turn it over back to Hannah and to Kat McCandless, who are going to provide an update on Climate Ready Boston. This is work, of course, that many of you know very well, and your efforts have directly shaped both the planning and the projects in that work. And then second, we're going to introduce Jeff Herzog and the Army Corps of Engineers, whom we're excited to have as partners on a particular element of that work, the portfolio of mid and long-term coastal resilient projects in Boston. And third, we hope to leave at least half the time for your questions and comments specific to this Army Corps partnership. And of note, this will be the first of many conversations about obviously this work in general and this partnership in particular. So if we're not able to get to all the questions today, or if you have to drop off earlier, or if other questions arise for you afterwards, we're also going to be hosting a series of office hours over the next 2 weeks, in addition to a series of other community conversations we're going to be having on this work. Obviously, all of this work is being done with the intent of protecting you, our constituents, our city, our neighborhoods, our region from the reality of a rising Boston Harbor. And over the last 7 years, through the Climate Ready Boston work, we've built a community-driven, data-informed plan that has projected sea level rise and storm surge, mapped flood paths and their impacts, and developed concept designs with your input. And more recently, a lot of our focus has been turning towards implementation. Langone Park in the North End, Martins Park in the Fort Point Channel, flood barriers in East Boston, and more. And as a city, we are looking to accelerate that pace of implementation. And one of the partners we can bring to this effort is the Army Corps, who has expertise and experience and resources, as well as a growing focus in the Northeast on the sort of nature-based approaches that align with the Climate Ready Boston vision that we've set. Projects that can get built by the Army Corps are unlocked through congressional authorization. And to unlock that congressional authorization, you start with a coastal storm risk management feasibility study. And that coastal storm risk management feasibility study is really the focus of this partnership. It's a multi-year study that's, again, focusing on those sort of mid and longer term resilience projects. And it'll go through some work of reviewing and validating and refining the models and the designs that emerge through Climate Ready Boston, all done in collaboration with you so that what we build once and we build it right. And all of that work is going to be happening sort of through a process that that Jeff will line out, but it is sort of built upon this foundation of collaboration that we've set through the Climate Ready Boston project. So I want to thank you again for all the time which you're going to spend this morning, all the time you've already spent with us on the Climate Ready Boston project, and really for the collaboration on the work ahead. And so with that, I will turn it over to Kat and Hannah, who will take us to the first part of our agenda, which is the update and context setting around Climate Ready Boston.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Again, thanks for being here. We encourage everyone to use the chat, think of questions. As Chris mentioned, we will have plenty of time at the end of the meeting for a question and answer session. So we're looking forward to that. And with that, I will pass it over to Kat McCandless, who's going to take us through an overview of the Climate Ready Boston effort.
Thank you, Hannah. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see so many familiar faces in the room. My name is Kat McCandless. I am a climate resilience project manager, as has been said, working with the team for the past 2 years on coastal resilience efforts. So I know everyone here, or a lot of people here, are very familiar with the work that we've done, but we just want to make sure that everyone knows where we've been, what we're working on currently, and where we're going next. So to start, the City of Boston released Climate Ready Boston, the original report in 2016, which included a comprehensive vulnerability assessment of current and potential risks associated with each of the 3 climate hazards under a low, medium, and high greenhouse gas emissions scenario. In addition to providing updated projections, the Climate Ready Boston report included an implementation roadmap that identified the areas of the city that are projected to be the most vulnerable to extreme heat, stormwater flooding, and coastal flooding from sea level rise and storms. The report also outlined key initiatives and strategies and milestones to help the city prioritize projects and interventions that must be undertaken to protect Boston's communities and buildings and infrastructure and economy from these rising risks. That said, the original Climate Ready Boston report has evolved into the city's ongoing initiative to adapt to the current and projected impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. So as a coastal city with 47 miles of shoreline, the initial focus of Climate Ready Boston has been to address coastal and stormwater flooding. Projections indicate that Boston's sea levels are likely to rise by about 9 inches as early as 2030 and 36 inches as soon as 2070 if emissions continue at their current pace, plus an additional 4 inches of land subsidence, which is the gradual sinking of land. By 2070, we anticipate approximately 40 inches of sea level rise across the city, or a little over 3 feet. And storms of greater magnitudes are going to become more frequent than they have been in the past with increased average rainfall. Next slide, please. So one of the recommendations from the original Climate Ready Boston report was to conduct neighborhood level climate resilience planning studies for Boston's coastal communities. This enabled us to take a closer look at the localized impacts and specific strategies that could be undertaken to mitigate coastal flood risk in these neighborhoods. So since 2016, we've completed planning projects in each of these 5 coastal neighborhoods, including the first phase of planning for East Boston and Charlestown in 2017, South Boston in 2018, the North End and Downtown and Dorchester in 2020, and East Boston and Charlestown phase 2 in 2022. I think many of you know we've experienced a few nor'easters in the past 5 years or so that have demonstrated the impacts of coastal flooding, but we fortunately haven't experienced a catastrophic flooding event like that of Hurricane Sandy. So something of particular note in the work that we do on Climate Ready Boston is that the city has been undertaking this work proactively to address worsening flood risk rather than reacting after a major storm event has occurred. Next slide, please. We also want to highlight that Climate Ready Boston's planning is a piece of a broader citywide effort to comprehensively address climate change in the way that we design and build and operate our city. So beyond just coastal resilience, this includes complementary efforts to address climate change in public right-of-ways, parks and open spaces, buildings and the zoning code, social resilience and racial equity, and addressing the impacts of rising temperatures. Next slide. When conducting the Coastal Resilience Solutions plans, we've had 4 goals and objectives that drive the approach to the process. So first, we seek to identify the location and the timing of coastal flood risk across a given study area, including a 1% annual chance storm with 40 inches of sea level rise. Second, we engage stakeholders from the community, local community-based organizations and advocacy groups, the private sector, and city and state and federal government to identify the key priorities, opportunities, and constraints that inform these coastal resilience strategies. And over the years, many of you who are in the room with us today have partnered with us and contributed to these plans. And we're so grateful for your participation and your continued commitment to this work. So third, we work with an interdisciplinary team of engineers and architects and many more to develop effective coastal resilience solutions that provide multiple benefits for the given community that we're working in. And last, we create an implementation roadmap that outlines the timing by which solutions need to be constructed to address flood risk and next steps for advancing each individually proposed project. Next slide. So, all of these plans present conceptual designs that have been informed by significant community and stakeholder engagement and are deeply vetted for technical feasibility. From there, each individual project must go through additional stages of design, engineering, and permitting before it's ready for construction. And engagement spans all of these stages and is critical for informing the ultimate form that a given strategy that's proposed in a plan will take when it's being constructed. So planning has been a huge component of Climate Ready Boston's work, but now I'm going to pass it back to Hannah to share our progress on implementing near-term projects that have been identified over the years in these individual coastal resilience solutions plans.
Great, thank you so much, Kat. So now that we've heard an overview of the resilience work in the city, we're going to talk through an update on progress in moving these Climate Ready Boston projects forward through the development process that she just mentioned and really into reality. So we've categorized these projects that we'll be discussing here. The first category is completed projects. So everything in this category has been fully planned, designed, and constructed. All of these completed projects are parks that are located on city-owned land. And these are projects that have incorporated resilience improvements into open space and recreational areas. So the first project here we have is Martins Park, which is located in the Seaport along the Fort Point Channel and was constructed in 2019. And the park includes protective measures against future flooding, including raising portions of the park and installing mini piles and vegetated beds to prevent erosion at higher tides. And the main pathway through the center of the park was raised with a high point in the middle to help prevent it from being a flood pathway for the Fort Point neighborhood for the next decade. The next project we have is McConnell Park and Playground, which is located in Dorchester. And the city completed improvements to McConnell Park and Playground in 2022 to provide both additional recreational benefits and coastal flooding protection. And then we also have Langone Park and Popolo Playground, which is in the north end. And January 2021 marked the completion of a comprehensive reconstruction and upgrade of this park on the waterfront, which is designed with climate resilient features to really protect the shoreline, the neighborhood, and other public assets from projected sea level rise and increased storm events. The next category of projects are those that are currently in progress. So projects in this section are those that are on publicly owned land and have begun work to move from those conceptual designs laid out in the Climate Ready Boston coastal resilience plans to the next phase of design. And this project really includes conducting additional community outreach and completing engineering or geotechnical analyses to determine how best to advance the design. This category also includes projects that may be beyond that process and are currently in permitting and really moving actively toward construction. The first project here is Bryan Playground. This is located on the Mystic River on the edge of Charlestown, abutting Somerville, and the park covers just under 9 acres. The city has incorporated a resilient flood barrier into a redesign of the park to provide protection for the park and the surrounding low-lying areas. And the Parks Department is currently in the permitting process and hopes to begin construction by spring of 2024. Next project is East Boston Resilient Waterfront Project. The Boston Planning and Development Agency completed design for this project in 2022 and has applied for a Federal Emergency Management Agency or FEMA grant for final design, permitting, and construction of the project. And this project advanced the concepts proposed in Climate Ready Boston for Lewis Mall and Carlton Wharf, which are 2 critical flood entry points for the East Boston neighborhood. The next 2 projects really go together. They're Moakley Park and the Moakley Park Connectors project in Dorchester. So starting with Moakley Park, in early 2019, the city completed the Moakley Park Vision Plan, which includes plans to add climate resilience elements to the park to protect the park itself and the surrounding area from flood risks. And the city has submitted an application for a FEMA grant and was identified for further review. So is in that selection process now to construct that project. And then relatedly, the Resilient Moakley Park Connectors project aims to complete all pre-construction planning and design activities in support of climate resilience investments on the northern and southern areas of Moakley Park. And so this project is funded by a FEMA earmark to extend those protections planned for Moakley Park itself to really make sure that the flood pathway in this area is entirely closed. And that project is currently getting underway. Next is Long Wharf. So the Boston Planning and Development Agency is currently in the process of selecting a consultant to advance the design of flood protections at Long Wharf. The aim of this work being to determine a preferred comprehensive plan and suggest the most impactful projects to mitigate future district-wide flood impacts in the area. Next, we have the Fort Point Channel. So this is a flood pathway into Boston that is projected to cause repetitive damage to transportation, infrastructure, homes, and businesses. And in 2019, the city applied to a FEMA grant program to design and construct a coastal resilience project along the channel. And that project is currently in environmental review with FEMA. Moving over to East Boston, the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway is a pedestrian linear open space in East Boston that connects Jeffreys Point waterfront to Constitution Beach. And the city is currently planning a renovation with the goal of reducing near and long-term stormwater and coastal flooding, and also provide other recreational and extreme heat benefits in the area. The Raymond Flynn Marine Park, which is located in South Boston, is an area that's home to maritime industrial activity. And the Boston Planning and Development Agency is currently in the process of selecting a consultant to advance design of flood protections at the park, again, with the goal being to develop options to really contribute to protecting the park from future sea level rise and coastal storm events. And then finally, in this in progress category, we have Tinian Beach and Conley Street, which is located in Dorchester. The Boston Planning and Development Agency is leading a project to develop options to reduce flood risk from sea level rise and coastal storms at Tinian Beach and at the Conley Street underpass. And we received a state coastal resilience grant to advance the design of the solutions in this area, and that project is also underway. The final category of projects that we're going to talk about here are public agency partner-led projects. So these are ongoing efforts that are being led by state agencies who we are partnering with to advance this work within the city limits. So beginning here in East Boston, we have the Belle Isle Marsh study. Currently, the Department of Conservation and Recreation is leading actually two efforts with the Belle Isle Marsh in East Boston, one of which is focused on the marsh's ecological restoration, and the other project is focused on regional flood protection of the properties around the marsh, as you can see here. Next, we have the Route 1A corridor study. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation is currently leading a study to evaluate future uses of its rail parcels along the Chelsea Creek, which is also considering the impacts of climate change in that study. So staying here in East Boston, the next project is Piers Park Phase 2 and 3. Massport recently broke ground on the construction of Piers Park Phase 2, which will create a new park that includes resilience features to help protect the area from flooding and sea level rise. And then additionally, the Trustees of Reservations has an official site developer designation from Massport to transform an adjacent pier into a new park, which is being called Piers Park 3. And this proposed waterfront park would create new public open space, add a natural buffer to storm surge and sea level rise, and restore what is currently an unused and abandoned pier. And then finally, we have the K Circle and Morrissey Boulevard study in Dorchester. So the city, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, MassDOT, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation are all undertaking this joint planning effort in the area. The goal of which is really to recommend transportation and infrastructure improvements to mobility and to strengthen climate resiliency in these locations in Dorchester. In addition, we also really want to acknowledge that we know there's a significant amount of other resilience work occurring across the city, including in nonprofit and community and private spaces that I know many of you today are leading and which we are really excited to continue engaging in and working with you on those efforts. So we've just discussed an overview of the coastal resilience work that's currently complete or in progress. We know there are other near-term priorities that are really essential to addressing immediate and near-term flood risks, and we're committed to identifying strategies to partner at the private, state, and federal level to really accelerate and complete this work. Our goal really is to push forward on these immediate needs to provide robust solutions for near-term flood risks as soon as possible to really address those needs. And also, as part of our commitment to advancing coastal resilience, we are looking into the medium and long term and seeking to identify strategies to address coastal risks that will really appear beyond just the immediate future. And so we really see this partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a great opportunity to turn toward medium and long-term risks and really leverage the expertise of a great federal partner to plan for those risks in the future. So with that, we're now going to give an overview of our partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as we've begun work on this coastal storm risk management study. The city's partnership with the Army Corps is really intended to build upon the ongoing work of Climate Ready Boston and other resilience projects and work across the city. We're really excited about the Army Corps' expertise and capacity to progress these medium and long-term projects, and also their ability, as Chris mentioned earlier, to open access to federal funding for these large coastal resilience infrastructure projects. And again, both of these processes require congressional authorization as part of the process that we've embarked upon. And the authorization is really only possible once we've done a specific study called a Coastal Storm Risk Management Feasibility Study. The study uses a specific process to assess coastal management projects and their effects on communities, ecosystems, property, and infrastructure as they seek to reduce coastal storm risks. And so the study will result in a set of potential designs and ultimately a set of recommended coastal resilience projects across the city. The study is evaluating and validating and tweaking the concepts and proposals that have been put forward through Climate Ready Boston and really building upon a lot of the conceptual work that many of you have been engaged in to date. So we're really excited to be introducing this project, and we're really glad that you're here to engage because your voice will really be critical in this multi-year process to shape these designs and projects. So we want to talk through the major steps in this study so that you can really begin to see how best to plug into this effort moving forward. So there's 4 main phases here, all of which will have opportunities for community engagement throughout the process. So first is scoping and creation of alternative solutions. This phase will include an assessment of existing work and the development of different flood protection and management measures. The next is solution evaluation and analysis. So this phase will assess the proposed solutions and determine if they reach the partnership's goals. Third, we have feasibility analysis, with this phase aiming to measure the likelihood of success of the preferred and recommended solutions. And then finally, as we alluded to earlier, the final step is this Washington level review. So the preferred solution will be sent to the federal government to determine whether it will receive funding for implementation. And we will touch on this again later, but we really want to emphasize now that there will be a lot of opportunities throughout the study process for you to engage and provide feedback, and the city will be leading the community engagement and outreach effort for the study in partnership with the Army Corps. In terms of progress to date, since the project kicked off in late summer 2022, the city has been working with the Army Corps to really build a foundation for the project and move forward. So some of the things we've been working on have included a kickoff and introduction to Climate Ready Boston. So the Environment Department within the city has been working with partners and with the Army Corps team to introduce and familiarize the team with the City of Boston resilience work and historical and ongoing resilience planning and work in the city. And part of this process has also included identifying public agencies who will participate in the project as coordinating organizations. So these agencies have met with the Army Corps to provide critical information and data to really help the team move forward with their analyses that are set forward. And the Army Corps team has been following those procedures that are set out through the Army Corps and through federal guidance to complete initial scoping and analysis steps. And really now what we're doing is preparing for an initial project milestone, which is presenting on the progress we've made to date and building our partnership and really building a strong case for federal interest in the project to the Army Corps leadership. It's also worth noting that there is a different U.S. Army Corps of Engineers study that you might hear about that's occurring simultaneously at the state level. So this other study aims to assess long-term risk and resilience at the watershed level. So it is broader than the city study itself, but these 2 studies will be coordinated and recommendations will be aligned throughout these processes. And so finally, we just want to touch on, again, opportunities for engagement. So the community will have a really important voice to assist in identifying the recommended plan, and there will be multiple opportunities to provide feedback and input into the study. We really want to make sure that community input and feedback early in the process is occurring, so that will help the team shape recommendations that really are well informed and that have support of folks across the city. And then at the same time, we also want to recognize that this is a deliberate multi-year process that will likely take 3 or more years to evaluate solutions across a range of factors. And again, the city will be working in close partnership with the Army Corps to lead the public outreach and engagement effort. And we really want to provide as many opportunities as possible for the community to provide feedback and input on the planning process. So with that overview, I'm now going to turn it over to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, specifically Jeff Herzog, to give us a presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm blessed to be here this morning. My name is Jeff Herzog, and I work for the New England District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We're right up there out of Concord Park, Massachusetts, so we're not too far from Boston. Our district covers all 6 states in the New England area, and so we have 38,000 civil servant technical experts and planning experts across 8 divisions and 48 districts in the United States. And so about 500 to 600 of those employees work for the New England district. And we are not all green suit soldiers. We do have a 3-star general chief of engineers. And I myself am a retired U.S. Army First Sergeant, but we're blessed to have the service of 38,000 civil servants. And so we are considered the nation's engineering firm when it comes to water resource projects, whether it's riverine flooding, coastal flooding associated with coastal storms, sea level change, dam safety modification and operational safety, maritime navigation, so Boston Harbor and Reserve Channel and the Massport Autoport, those areas are also New England District projects, as well as we've really put emphasis over the last 2 decades on aquatic ecosystem restoration, restoring the floodplain to a less degraded state through providing opportunity and habitat opportunity. We are also FEMA's engineering firm when it comes to the COVID pandemic that occurred from 2020 and beyond. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, you may have seen, participated and worked with FEMA in developing response to that. But whenever there is any kind of storm, hurricane, or snow melt across the nation, you'll see that FEMA calls on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to help in the planning, the preparation response, as well as recovery operations across the entire nation, to include the New England region. So we have a team and members of our district who participate in those efforts. And one thing that I want to make sure is taken away from this meeting is that when you work with the Corps of Engineers, you work with the entire enterprise, and that is from a NEPA perspective, from a Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act, from a design and construction, from a planning, from an economic and cost perspective. You bring the expertise of the entire Corps when you sign on with us. And a couple examples that you can look at just in the region of the New England area. If you've ever driven through New Haven, Connecticut along I-95, you know that there's some low spots there. And so we recently completed a similar study for that region, in which we'll be implementing a coastal storm risk project, and we're calling it Connecticut Long Wharf. The New Charles River Dam is in your backyard. For many of you, it's in your front yard. That project itself, the dam itself, is not actually scoped into this study that we're going through now. And that's because there's already a parallel study going on between the state of Massachusetts and the New England District in order to evaluate adaptation requirements in the future, whether they're structural adaptations or whether they're operational adaptations that are going to be necessary when you look and take into consideration climate change and sea level change. So that study is already ongoing, and the results of that study will be incorporated into our analysis, but it's separate from the storm risk management study that we're beginning with the city of Boston. The Belle Isle Marsh and Wood Isle Marsh are 2 urban salt marshes in East Boston. And we have, I noticed that Stone Living Lab is online today, and our Engineering Research Development Center of Expertise, ERDIC is what they call themselves, but they're already working in that area, researching what we call engineering with nature, and that is using nature and natural-based features to build resilience and adaptability into our community. Rather than just going gray and hard and tall and for community resilience, we do focus a lot on engineering with nature and natural-based features. As well as there is a recently completed coastal storm risk management study in Rhode Island, working with the state there. And then can we get the next slide? So you see my picture in case you don't see my video. I am Jeff Herzog. I'm the project manager and the lead planner. I've been with the Corps of Engineers since 2015, since I retired from active duty service. I've done a lot of work beyond just New England, but I've done a lot of work in Alaska, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands. And my focus is on urban planning, community resilience, climate change adaptation, and really taking all of the engineering and science and combining it with community outreach, communications, and working with the community to develop a project that balances future risk with community impacts and cost efficiency. I'm blessed to have Lisa Winter as my lead engineer. She's got extensive experience in the New England district and the New England region. From a climate change perspective, she is considered part of our climate change and resilience cadre for the nation. And so she is definitely a subject matter expert there. Todd Randall, driving the vessel up there in top right. He is a NEPA coordinator with several years of experience. And he also has extensive experience in the Boston area, having done NEPA work for the recent harbor deepening project that occurred there. Courtney Jackson is new to the New England district, but she's been working with the Corps of Engineers as a economist for several years. And so as we go through this process, which may be a little bit different than what you're used to, is we look at future economic, intangible and tangible impacts of coastal storm risk and climate change and sea level change on the local population. So as we move forward, it's not just about money, it's not just about local business, but it's also about those intangible socioeconomic impacts. And so we'll be, you'll see a lot of our faces over the next few years, and we look forward to working with you. Next slide, please. So as Hannah mentioned, we just kicked off in August of 2022. And that's when we were authorized and funded by Congress to pursue this study. And so when the Army Corps does a project, a study like this in Civil Works, we don't operate unilaterally. We require three legs to the stool is the way I like to give the analogy. And that is, you need authorization from Congress. Beyond authorization, you need funding from Congress through some sort of appropriation. But then we also need a non-federal partner, because the study process itself is a partnership with the city of Boston in this case. And on the larger scale watershed study, it's a partnership with the state of Massachusetts. And so we cost share with the city of Boston, 50% federal and 50% non-federal. And this study specifically is authorized to build upon Climate Ready Boston. We understand that there is extensive work over the last 7 years, and we want to take advantage of that work and the community input to use as a foundation for us, because what we're looking to do is come out of this study with a recommendation for Congress, not to just continue to study, but to actually design and implement projects across. And so what we will be looking at, as I mentioned, Courtney will be the lead on this piece, but looking at the impacts over a 50-year period of economic analysis. Now, that is certainly not to say that the project is only going to be around for 50 years. We actually look for adaptability and sustainability over 100 years. But with the uncertainty, the market conditions, and all the different variables, we can only extend our economic analysis out 50 years. And so that's why when we look at our project horizon, we do an economic analysis for 50 years, but we do a full planning horizon for the 100 years and the impacts to the community to make sure that beyond 50 years, the project remains in good shape. But so you've seen this slide before. What I want to do now is actually drill down a little bit further and kind of break it down by years so that you can understand why we're not going to be making a final recommendation in 2023 or 2024. We're going to go through a process to really paint a picture and tell a story so that Congress, there's not much choice. It becomes obvious that investment in the city of Boston is necessary, not only for the national economy, but also for the community resilience in the city itself. So let's go to the next slide and let's step through the next few years. So in 2023, this is the first step. There are specific requirements according to the National Environmental Protection Act, as well as the state of Massachusetts. But this study goes beyond that in our community outreach and engagement because it's critical to make sure that during the study process and the planning process that we bring the community in and understand impacts and optimize those outcomes. So that way when we get to the implementation and the construction phase, that it's not new to the community and that they understand what it's going to look like and how it's going to function. So community engagement is vital to answering, even from the very beginning, starting today, what does the future look like if the federal government doesn't invest? What we need to take advantage of the existing science, the engineering, the community engagement, all of the local knowledge, so that way we can validate what our science and engineering is showing us and that we're not just operating in a vacuum. We need to understand what are those risks to the community safety. Long Wharf, just the last couple of months has seen flooding and inundation right there at the Charter House. So we need to understand how often is that occurring? Where beyond what we see in the media is that happening? And maybe it's just not being shared with the media and the local municipality. What are the impacts to homes? What are the impacts to mobility? You have MBTA and the T and the Silver Line and the buses. You have Uber, Lyft. We need to understand what are those impacts during these storm events beyond just inundation to your homes, but to the mobility of the community that depends on this public transportation. What are the impacts to the local economy? We can easily calculate, okay, a business was inundated, it's clearly going to be shut down for this long. But what happens to the local economy? Specifically, you look at East Boston. If the Shaw's in East Boston becomes inundated or damaged due to a storm event, East Boston becomes a food desert. What is the impact? How do people maintain food security and sustainability? So we know what we see already, and we know what we think will happen, but we need to understand how does the community see and how would the community respond and how does it impact the community? And so that's why that community engagement is so important. We need to understand not only just from an economical and a people portion of the ecosystem, but there's also the natural resources and the cultural and historic resources. We need to understand what are those areas that are sensitive and prone in the current condition, but also in the future without project condition. With sea level change, what's that going to do to the ecological, to the urban salt marshes, for example? That's what our focus is for 2023. In 2024, when we have that picture, when we understand that picture, then it's the big question is what do we do about it? How do we address this? Climate Ready Boston has already taken a 7-year head start in looking at some of these. And so now it's a matter of looking at the medium and the long-term risk over the next 50 and 100 years and find out how can the federal government invest in some of these projects in order to reduce the risk, not only to the ecosystem of the built environment, but also to the natural environment as well. Where should the government invest to support those local and state regional efforts? How can the federal government invest? Is it through planning? Is it through adaptation? Is it through actual structural construction of features? That's all to be determined, and that's going to require your input, because that bottom bullet there is probably the big takeaway is how do we optimize benefits to the community over the next 50 to 100 years, while also balancing that with the cost of construction today, or the cost of construction in 50 years if we don't construct today, or the community impacts. By constructing something today to guard against sea level change in 50 years, how is the community itself going to be impacted by that? That's 2024. Let's jump forward to 2025. So in 2025, this is where the community outreach and the NEPA process really kind of parallel and move forward, because in 2025, we'll look to present a plan for public review and peer review and academic review and technical and agency review. The Corps of Engineers does not just do a project and a study and then publish it and say we're good to go. We go through an extensive review process for public, state, and agency. Through our peers across the enterprise will take an opportunity to review it. We'll put this out for an independent external review, for an academic review, as well as going through a legal and policy review. So it's not that we're just going to simply develop a report within the New England district, put it out on the street and say, Congress, give us money, let's build. It goes through that extensive process. And part of that is that NEPA process. But beyond the NEPA process, we'll want to engage with the community to provide feedback. This is what we heard from you in 2024. This is how we evaluated that. This is what the science and the engineering showed us based off of that. This is how we need to be able to tie these areas together, because if you don't tie them together, then you could create vulnerabilities and weak points in your system. So while we look at this independently as neighborhoods, we also have to look at this from a system-wide approach. And then, of course, there's a lot of resource agency coordination for conservation recommendations and mitigation, and considering those historic and natural resources. And so that's where Todd, Courtney, Lisa, and myself will be really doing a lot of engagement with the community, with the civic community organizations, but also with the resource agencies in that 2025. So then we'll be able to take all of that in 2026 and develop that final recommendation, that story for Washington, D.C. leadership and for Congress to be able to implement a project that not everybody, you can't make everybody happy. If you put 20 people in a room, you're going to get 20 different answers based off of where they live, what their mission is, what their vision is. But if we can make everybody understand where our process is coming from and where that story is coming from, then we can tie it together and make it a community plan and not just a federal plan. We'll finalize that NEPA document and we'll publish it. And then our chief of engineers, that three-star general, he will sign off and submit that recommendation to Congress. We're looking at the end of 2026. And so beyond 2026, it becomes a matter of waiting on Congress and our leadership to authorize and fund the implementation. So that could happen as early as 2026, 2027, or depending as to what the priorities and the funding looks like, it could be on that. So we don't like to project beyond the study phase, but we want to make sure that you all understand what the process is, who we are, and there. And I know Hannah and the team are going to share this information with you, but truly beyond today and the office hours, we have a website at the Corps, we have a website at the city, we have mailboxes that you can contact. We will post updates to those websites. Really, we appreciate you attending this morning, but this is the beginning. We want to make sure that you stay engaged and participate and provide input throughout the process, so that way we can make this a community project and not just a federal investment. Hannah, next slide. So where are we looking at? We're looking at all 5 neighborhoods as we classify them and as they've been classified in Climate Ready Boston. And so we'll be looking at sea level change and structures at risk. Let's go to the next slide. Sea level change. What you see here is a historical sea level change projections. It's not a matter of if sea level change is going to occur. You can look historically from 1930 and see that sea level change is occurring. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and by how much. And so we will look and evaluate sea level change projections based on different science and based off of different modeling to ensure that we build an adaptable and sustainable project moving into the future. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and by how much. Next slide. Because when you look at, this is utilizing the Woods Hole Group MCFRM model. Many of you are familiar with it from Climate Ready Boston. But when we do just a preliminary economic look at the national database, this is not an in-depth look by neighborhood. This is just pulling from the national database. When you look at those sea level change projections and you look at the coastal storm risk, there's a potential 18,000 structures. That is not counting vehicle traffic. That's not counting socioeconomic impacts. That's not counting local economy impacts. That's just inundation to structures. So in and of itself, that shows the importance of the federal government in investigating investment opportunities. Next slide. So what does that look like? Everything you see here on the screen are things that we've been discussing with not only the city of Boston, but the state of Massachusetts, Water Sewer Commission, all the different resource agencies at a state and federal level. These are the considerations that we need to look at beyond just impacts to one particular neighborhood and one particular street. And so when we look at this, next slide, we have to start identifying what are the building blocks of a plan. And so considering the previous slide, considering the number of structures, considering the sea level change impacts, we're going to consider a whole wide range of measures, and they're not going to be a cookie cutter's stone wall for one neighborhood or managed retreat in another neighborhood. No, we have to look at the impacts and the adaptability of the neighborhoods individually. And so we'll be looking at elevated harbor walks. We'll be looking at nature and natural-based features to not degrade the salt marshes in East Boston and the Neponset area, but to promote migration and development and sustainability of them through nature and natural-based features. There will be some places where space constraints just require a vertical flood wall. So what does that vertical flood wall look like? What we're not talking about is Paducah or New Orleans, where you have 25 foot above ground level. What we're talking about is probably on the average of 3 to 5 feet. And so how do we blend those into the built environment so that it becomes in 5 years part of the natural scenery, and unless you've been there for 25, 30 years, you don't realize that anything's changed. So it's a matter of where we have to have vertical flood walls, blend them in using urban planning and urban landscaping and architecture. Building adaptations. You look at the World Trade Center in Boston, or if you look at Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital in Charlestown, both of those areas have already started undergoing some of these building adaptations where you take your mechanical and your electrical infrastructure and elevate it to the second floor. And that way, as we move forward and we no longer have these massive storms that are creating inundation, but just regular sea level king tides and sea level change are impacting some of these areas. So we want to look at building adaptations in order to make sure that they are resilient over time. There are some areas that may be looked at for managed retreat over time. Are we talking about buyout tomorrow and then moving in the next 5 years? No, but when you look at a 100-year period of planning horizon, it might make sense in certain areas to start looking and planning today for managed retreat in 75 years. So as buildings become no longer occupied, it's not a matter of dilapidation, but it's a matter of managed retreat and resilience so that you're not creating more hazards in the future. And of course, land use planning. With Climate Ready Boston, the City of Boston, and Mayor Wu's initiatives and her State of the City address, I will tell you that City of Boston is at the spear, that tip of the spear, leading the way when it comes to land use planning. But there may be opportunities for us to come in and provide some assistance and provide some experience from across the nation. And so when we talk about land use planning, we're not coming in and dictating that, hey, we need to rezone this area from residential to commercial or to green space. No, what we're talking about is here's our experience from across the nation. Maybe this will be useful to the City of Boston. I think that's my last slide, Hannah, but we can move to the next one. Yeah, there we go. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Jeff. I'm actually going to turn it over to Allison Bruzius, the Commissioner of the Environment Department, now to make a couple comments.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Jeff, and to the whole Army Corps team. And I'm going to keep it really short. Just before we move into Q&A, we wanted to bring ourselves back just one more time to this broad timeline for the project. As you've heard a couple times today, these projects are projects that we can build with the Army Corps only if we unlock these efforts through congressional authorization. And that authorization is unlocked by this study, this Coastal Storm Risk Management Project. Through the process, we'll build on the foundation of the projects and the solutions that we've identified through Climate Ready Boston with all of your help. The priorities and the feedback that we've heard through those projects and those processes, that work that all of you have already put into those efforts will be brought forward and will be embedded into this next phase of the work. And with each of these steps to validate and assess and refine the options and to advance this next phase of design, we want to do it in partnership with you. And we hope to bring your expertise not just to these projects, but to the community engagement process to make sure that we're reaching everyone and that we're engaging in this process in a way that we're bringing all of the residents of Boston into this design and making sure that we're building something that's right for Boston. So I just want to thank you for your time. Really looking forward to having a good discussion right now and then the many more discussions to come. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Hannah.
Great. Thank you again, everyone, for your engagement and your questions. We are now going to open the Q&A session. Because we are here with the Army Corps team, we're going to try and focus a lot of the questions on questions pertaining to the study. We are going to have opportunities, as we said earlier, to have some office hours to chat with the team about other projects that might be moving along and connect with the right project managers for those efforts. So again, we're going to kind of focus on questions about our partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers. I know that there have been a number of really good questions coming through in the chat. So we're going to just start with a couple of the chat questions, and then we'll move to some live questions as well. Maybe we can start with a question about the state project, about the watersheds, or particular which watersheds are being included in that. Jeff, do you want to make a comment about the Army Corps state study?
Sure. So within the Metropolitan Coast Shed study, and we're calling it a coast shed because it goes beyond just the riverine risk, but also the coastal risks within the watershed. It includes a total of 18 different communities. It's being partnered and led by the state EEA. I think I saw Ms. Yellen on the call, as well as Barbara Blunaris is a partner of mine at the New England District, and those two are leading the effort for the study there. But a big piece of that study is trying to take a more regional approach to what the city of Boston has already accomplished in Climate Ready Boston. Because if you start having 18 different communities implementing plans without tying it together on under a more regional and strategic approach, that's when you create vulnerability and weak points. And so that's really the focus of those 18 communities within that study. Boston being one of them, by the way.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff. And we also will link resources. There is a web page, a public web page regarding that state study. We'll include that when we send out materials after this, and it's also linked on the City of Boston's Army Corps partnership website as well. So lots of resources available about this. Okay, another question in the chat. Will you be looking at the same areas Climate Ready Boston already looked at and engaged the community about? If so, how will past engagement and feedback be honored? Allison, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Allison. I'll let you start.
Go ahead. So yes, fully acknowledge that we have been through many processes of planning already, and that we have developed a lot of community feedback, and that we appreciate that time, and we are not ignoring any of that. All of that work will be brought into this process. We are moving from a basis of the priorities we have clearly heard and the designs that we have already developed in Climate Ready Boston. What we need to do is bring these early designs into a framework that works with the Army Corps so that they can be assessed and validated through the Army Corps process, which will then unlock them for access to these resources. So going to get a very deep second set of vetting, make sure that these really are exactly the right elements. And if things change, we're going to bring all of those pieces back to you, and we'll have an opportunity to see the things in 2017. Are they exactly the things that we still want to be building in 2023? We believe so, and we're starting from that foundation, but we want to open up this opportunity as we advance the design and assessment to look at new things that might have developed in the meantime. Jeff, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I would say that technology has changed significantly since 2017. And so potentially the potential picture and the potential solutions have evolved since 2017. And so, yes, while we may go back and look at a lot of the same things in the same areas and do a lot of community outreach, we would ask that you come just as we will come with an open mind based off of changes, what we've seen and what we've seen across not only the national community, but the international community when it comes to storm risk and adaptation.
Great, thanks for those responses. And then a related question is, I appreciate the understanding of the central role that community feedback must play, recognizing that many of us on this call are already connected to this work. I hope the definition of community is more broad and more diverse than we can be ourselves. What steps will be taken to ensure that? Someone from the city side want to jump in on that question?
Sure, I can take that again. I think that we're always looking to improve our engagement efforts with each project we do. So we're going to take all of the processes that we've been already employing through Climate Ready Boston, but look to hear from you on which parts of those have worked most successfully, where you'd like to see more of different types of feedback and engagement moments, and where you'd like to see less of others that maybe you like less or work not as well for your groups, for residents that you know, or for yourselves. So are more targeted focus groups on specific areas and specific strategies, what you think works best for you or your team? Are there instead more broad open surveys or asynchronous moments of review that you'd prefer? We're going to be doing the whole suite, from large open public community meetings to office hours to going to community events and tabling and office hours, the gambit. We just would love to hear from you as we go. What of that you think works best and you'd like to see more of, and what is less effective for all of you?
Thanks, Allison. And I think this is, maybe you answered part of this question already, but the question is Army Corps running an independent community engagement process over these next few years, and what is the plan for outreach and recruitment for that engagement? I think we've touched on this. The city will be leading the effort in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers. So it will be primarily from the city side, obviously with the support and full engagement of the Army Corps, using many of the approaches and strategies that Allison just touched on. Does anyone else want to make a comment about that question? Jeff, anything to add?
No, I'm looking at some of the other questions and comments in the chat.
Okay, great. We'll keep moving. So the next question, will any part of the study look into barriers from permitting and land use limitations for these critical coastal areas? Do you want to comment on that, Jeff?
Sure. So what I will tell you is let's start with the elephant in the room, and that is a barrier island outer surge barrier. And so what we're not going to do is we're not going to take all of the efforts from the city of Boston in the past and take them and set them aside. However, it may look reasonable for us in certain areas like Fort Point Channel and others to look at a barrier type solution. And then when we look at those, we do have to look at not only from a national and a federal permitting perspective, but also from a natural resource diadromous fish impacts and fish passage impacts, and then the Coastal Wetlands Act at the state and municipal permitting rules. So yes, as we look at all of these different suites of building blocks, we will have to consider a full range of permitting and land use requirements.
Allison, did you want to jump in? I saw you came off mute.
I was trying to see whose question that was. Was the question much more about barriers to permitting as opposed to physical barriers? That was more of a clarification for the questioner. Yes, so I think we're well aware and we'll be actively in a parallel process pursuing strategies to make sure that we're able to implement the resilience solutions identified in Climate Ready Boston and in the study and others. So I think a lot of what we learned through this process and that we've already learned through earlier phases of the process will be taken into that active engagement around permitting and making sure that our permitting regime works for the solutions that we need in the future. Rich, anything you want to add there?
Rich McGinnis, Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning at the BPDA. The community prefers nature-based solutions along the shoreline, which means altering, changing habitat resource areas for the better. And that will require engaging with the regulators from the local conservation commission, the state and the federal agencies. And it's something that we're committed to working on.
Thanks, Rich and Allison. Appreciate those responses. I think there's a couple of good questions about, I think, sort of touch on the scope of the study, and I think relate to kind of the federal authorization of the study. So one is, these are also likely to be among the coolest areas to be during increasingly hot summers. We should look at dual flood heat resilience with lots of shade and water elements for people. And I think a related question maybe we can talk about here too is there a plan to include rain-based flooding risks so the approach is comprehensive? And maybe I could ask Jeff to just comment on the sort of the scope of the study, and then Allison, if you want to touch on anything beyond that, but pass to Jeff first.
Yeah, so what I will say is that we are focused in this study on coastal hazards, sea level change, and impacts related to those hazards. And so from that aspect, though, in order to develop a comprehensive plan, you have to evaluate storm drainage and stormwater management. You have to evaluate the impacts of your structural recommendations on the community so that for lack of a better term, you don't drown the community from the inside by constructing barriers to protect from the outer harbor area. And so we will absolutely look at that. But will we evaluate economic benefits of stormwater management? No, which is why we are working very closely with the Water Sewer Commission and Charlie and his group to ensure that our plan is integrated with Water Sewer Commission plans and the City of Boston plans.
Allison or Rich, do you want to make a follow-on comment?
I think Jeff hit it at the end. There will, as this study comes up by the nature of the process that is prescribed for it, be things that will be outside of this study. That doesn't mean that we are any less committed to those. Those will be work that is actively advanced and accelerated along a parallel process with the study. So that work is moving forward in good coordination with the Water Sewer Commission, and we'll keep a tight synchronization across the projects throughout.
And the example that Jeff provided in New Haven, Long Wharf specifically, has multiple benefits, including stormwater, significant stormwater retention, and green space, softer shoreline.
Great, thanks for those responses. Allison, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add on that. I think, Jeff, you said this too, right? Wherever possible, we will be designing for the multiple co-benefits. It's just there are certain technical ways of evaluation that specify what you can assess in the cost benefit analysis. I got to turn it over to you, but that doesn't mean we're not designing for them. It's just how there are some of the assessments and evaluation pieces will be a little trickier, but we'll make it work.
Right, and there's some folks on this call who are more familiar with core studies than others, and so if you're looking through the chat and you see Mr. Nasser from Woods Hole Group put in a nice long comment about locally preferred plans, and so we look at economic benefits not just from a tangible return on investment. For every dollar invested, you save this much on coastal storm risk. There's a lot of other benefits from environmental quality, from regional economic opportunities, as well as stormwater impacts that we may not run through a model for the purpose of counting benefits, but as part of our planning process, we have to incorporate a multitude of impacts beyond just the water coming in from the harbor in order to develop that comprehensive and complete plan. And so at this point, it would be a little pre-decisional to say that we're developing a plan and that there's going to be a locally preferred plan or a plan that's not how our planning process works. As we paint the picture in 2024 and 2025, we will be communicating with all of you so that what did we miss? Because our science and engineering and modeling is only going to tell us so much. Local knowledge is going to really fill in a lot of those gaps of exactly what you're talking about there.
Great, thank you. Really good questions and responses. Appreciate it. A question about how FEMA interacts or is overruled by the Army Corps of Engineers. Jeff, do you want to comment on that?
FEMA is not overruled by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'll state that. FEMA is a separate federal agency. They have a mission, they have a vision, and they have rules and processes and policies that they follow. We partner with them in many ways, especially when it comes to water resources and coastal storm risk and flood risk. But it's not a matter of us overruling them or them overruling us. It's definitely a partnership. And in some areas we diverge, and in a lot of areas we converge when it comes to flood risk and hazard planning.
Thanks, Jeff. I think this is another great question. At a public meeting last week on the New York, New Jersey coastal program was struck by strong emphasis on environmental justice, barely mentioned so far here. Maybe Jeff, do you want to comment on? I know there's been a lot of focus from the senior level of Army Corps on this area, and then our team can comment as well.
Yeah, let me first by apologizing because I did not specifically come out and use the term environmental justice. And part of it is because words matter. When I use the term environmental justice, it may trigger different meanings and different understandings from different people. So environmental justice is an administrative priority. It's also a Corps of Engineers priority. And if you look at the EPA's EJ screening tool, if you look at the White House CEJST tool, if you look at the CDC social vulnerability tool, regardless of which one you look at, it tells you all the same thing, and that is that the city of Boston and every neighborhood that we are looking at in some form or fashion is vulnerable to hazardous stressors, whether it's related to public health or natural disaster events. And so while I did not come out and specifically say that the city of Boston and all 5 neighborhoods are considered environmental justice, or EJ as defined by the White House and the federal government, for example, 19 out of 23 census tracts in the neighborhood of Dorchester are considered EJ. The entire East Boston is. That's not to say that they're poor. That's not to say that they're disadvantaged. There is a lot of great people, history, culture, and community in those neighborhoods, but they are socially vulnerable to some of these hazardous stressors, whether it's public health or natural disasters. So we are treating and we are considering the entire study area as EJ by the federal definition, but it goes beyond that. It's about building community resilience and planning and socioeconomic stability for these communities moving forward. So I will take the hit and apologize for not specifically calling out EJ.
And Allison or Rich, did you want to jump in and make any additional comments?
Sure, I think we are committed, and I hope you agree by now that we are absolutely committed to embedding environmental justice into not just our process, certainly our processes, and not just our processes, but to the outcomes and the decision making that goes into the projects that we will be prioritizing. So a lot of what we're hoping to do throughout this study is to bring groups in to those processes to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is responsible and reflective of the needs and priorities of the community. And we look forward to working with you on this, and we'll continue to work through this throughout the process. I think we're also very pleased to see this move very excited by this move, the federal government, to bring Justice 40 and environmental justice explicitly into the process here, so that we are able, especially in some of the more technical pieces, to seriously consider the benefits to our communities beyond some of the more purely economic benefits that had been there in the past. So pleased with the move to embed Justice 40 into the process, and look forward to working with you on it.
Great, thank you. We have a question about marsh migration. So as we think of rising sea levels, we usually think of permitted land use and activity on properties at risk of going under. But what about adjacent properties? In particular, consider the concept of marsh migration for places like Belle Isle Marsh. Should we be looking at land use in adjacent properties that could be natural migration zones? Are we preserving those zones for ecological and flood prevention benefits rather than building in them? Jeff or Allison or Rich want to comment?
I'll start. I think absolutely a valid comment and a valid thing to be investigated. And it kind of goes back to that managed retreat area and discussion earlier. We're not talking about buying out and migrating today, but in 25, 30 years, as you see the water table continue to rise due to sea level change and the conditions in your area continue to change, maybe it makes sense to, where there's currently built environment, to allow that to become more natural, nature-based, whether it's an urban salt marsh or it's an open green space, something along those lines, to take some of those permeable surfaces that create drainage issues today and make them more permeable and natural in the future. And so that's absolutely some of the things that we're considering. And it's not to say that we're looking to buy out parcels and condemn property today, but it's about looking at that 100 years and see what makes sense and what benefits the community resilience.
I think, yes, I want to first jump back. I'm going to take a question out of order. Julie had a relevant point to the question that we just talked about on environmental justice. And I want to encourage people, please don't feel like you just have to be in the chat. Raise your hand, unmute. We want to have a discussion here. So we were just trying to get through the first questions first, but I don't want that to cause us to just have a quiet chat-based discussion. So please jump in. Julie, could I call on you to share your comment there?
Absolutely. I very much appreciate, Allison, particularly what you said of like, help us do the best engagement possible. And what I would say, and we are trying to do that at a regional level and learning a lot. And what I would say would be, in the absence of having a consulting field of people who are super engaged in community engagement and equity, it would be great if upfront, as folks are doing the policy and engineering work, if we could subcontract with community-based organizations to understand what the other needs and aspirations people have that could be addressed through these investments in climate. And I think this is an amazing opportunity that we don't want to miss, particularly with federal funding today, but also this, the philanthropic field we have in Boston and the major investments that we're about to make. So rather than waiting for the plan for people to respond to, let's get into those plans, the non-flood aspirations people have, including housing, transit, chemical exposure. You know, there's a bunch of things that people need that aren't necessarily about flooding, but we could address. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it's a really good thought there. I think we're gonna brainstorm on ways to do that. I think certainly one idea that comes to mind immediately that would love to talk more about is we've been working on this project called the Power Core. I think many of you are familiar about it, around job placement and job training in an earn to learn model that focuses on green infrastructure and green infrastructure jobs right now, and then is going to move into energy and housing. I think there could be some really nice connections with that, and I'm sure there are many other programs that or models for programs that this group can come up with if we put our heads together. So appreciate that. Thank you, Julie. Okay, apologies for out of turn, Hannah, but where are we going next?
No problem. I do also encourage people to speak up and ask their questions. There were really, really good questions in the chat. So just trying to get through everything. And again, thanks everyone for your really good comments. Was there any more follow-up on marsh migration that people wanted to talk about? I think that was on the question we were on right before this.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be dominating the conversation, so other people should feel free to jump in here. I mean, obviously it's already something that we're looking at very carefully through a number of processes, and we're going to bring it into the, I think Jeff, you already said, we're going to be bringing in the assessment of opportunities for marsh migration into this process as well. And we'll be looking at, throughout this process, we're going to be looking at where are the projects the fit for the Army Corps? How can we maximize the green and nature-based solutions as a part of those projects as well? And then if there are areas or opportunities that we can act in parallel processes, we're also going to be looking for those opportunities as well, so that we're just maximizing all of the efforts and resource in this space.
Great, thank you. A comment again about the New Charles River Dam study and how our study might interact with or overlap with it. Jeff, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that study is going on parallel, and it will be completed right about the time we're kind of painting our future without project condition over the next year or so. And so we'll be able to take those recommendations. What we need to understand is that study and that partnership with the state is done under a different authority and done with different partnerships. And so we will have to look at that study outcomes and build it into our plan, but we don't dictate to them what they're looking at, because they're using the same information that we are. And so we'll build their plan into our plan moving forward, and that's kind of that relationship. And then Hannah, I saw that Lois and John both have their hands up for questions, it looks like.
Yep, thanks. Maybe we'll pause with the chat questions, and I'll go to John. Do you want to unmute and ask your question or make a comment?
Sure. I just wanted to thank everyone for the presentation, and it's very helpful to understand how it's all working together, especially the idea of building the narrative to get the federal funding for what's needed. And in the meantime, I think the experience for a lot of the community groups on the ground has been being in meetings like this, where we're talking about climate ready, or we're talking about any of the sort of planning initiatives for the future. And then we also are going to local civic association meetings and zoning board meetings, and seeing projects that are moving forward now on the ground directly, usually, privately funded private projects, but getting zoning variances and such. And a lot of those projects do not really fit into a lot of the language that's used and that we have been using this entire presentation. So I'm just curious, and the marsh migration question is an example of that, where there are land use decisions being made today abutting those properties, and there are land use decisions being made abutting other properties, other places and things, and plans being produced that that there is a question as to how are those things going to be shaped by some of the knowledge and decisions and feedback that you're getting through this process, so that we don't end up saying we have at 2025 or wherever, we have this great plan for what we want to do here, but we've already permitted a bunch of things that make no sense and that have gone through. So how do we, what kind of checks are in there to prevent that from happening?
I can take this, or at least partially. Our approach to coastal storm risks into the future is layered, and one thing that we're focused on is for new projects that they are to be elevated and resilient for future flooding risks. So that's currently zoning that was put in place last year. So that's one way. It's like for the new projects that they are sort of independently protected, but at the same time working on these district scale neighborhood flood barriers. The question came up about managed retreat, for marshland, but also in general. And that's typically for repetitive loss properties. We don't have a lot of repetitive loss properties yet. And the goal is through these efforts, both near term, done through the state, the federal government and the city, and then later into the Army Corps project, is to prevent that. So, for projects we're approving and reviewing, is to make sure that they're independently protected, but in the long range that we're protecting the assets that support them, including the roadways and the infrastructure. And just on the marsh migration, when we kicked off this process with the Army Corps, we've had the state agencies, they've attended many of these meetings and workshops, including DCR, EPA, focusing on the Neponset River estuaries, Belle Marsh. So these, the resource areas, the natural resource areas of Boston are equally reviewed and considered as part of these efforts.
Great question. Thanks for asking. Lois, would you like to unmute and make a question or comment?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes,
okay,
we
good.
can.
I live in the Charlestown Navy Yard and am president of the local community organization, the Friends of the Charlestown Navy Yard. We have wonderful working relationships with the Navy and the National Park Service, but that brings the point that 1/3 of the land in the Charlestown Navy Yard is federal property, and nearby we have the Coast Guard. I'm excited that the Army Corps of Engineers is involved in hoping that they can have influence to make sure that there's continuity between federal property and city property.
And I'll comment on that. And that is both U.S. Coast Guard Station Boston as well as National Park Service there at the Charlestown Navy Yard have been involved in all of our discussions and in all of our scoping. And so we are absolutely, because again, if we don't consider them because they're another federal agency and we think they should take care of themselves, if we do that, we're creating inconsistencies and vulnerabilities across the entire city. And so we are absolutely including them. And the technical term that we use is that they are cooperating agencies as part of this study. And so they are being included.
Great, thank you.
Great questions. Thanks so much. Just going back through the chat, I'm going to ask folks who made comments if they're willing to unmute and ask their question or comment live. It looks like we have a question from Sarah McCammond about green infrastructure. Sarah, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Okay, Hannah, you threw me a little curveball there. I wasn't expecting that. So I was just really trying to understand if the scope of this project and how it impacts the infrastructure capacity that is obviously very related to any resilient solutions that we're putting in. And I believe that Jeff kind of said we can't protect and then let the inland, go if you get in trouble. So I was just trying to understand that if it is limited or not really included in this, then would federal dollars from this study be applied to infrastructure at all, or would that need to be a different type of funding mechanism to create that piece of it?
Sorry to put you on the spot, Sarah. Thank you for asking your question. Jeff, do you want to jump in and comment?
Yeah, no, so it's a very valid and great question. Thanks for that. And I think, you know, let's utilize stormwater management and sewer and interior drainage just as the example. I realize that there's other types of utilities and other types of infrastructure that you're talking about, specifically mass trans and tunnels and such. But as we're looking at designing our plans, let's keep in mind that there is a similar study going on at the watershed level and at the state resilience level, developing some of those. And so their plan will get tied into our plan will get tied into their plan. And so while we have limitations for our scope and taking care of interior drainage, sewer, utilities that we impact, there are additional studies going on utilizing the watershed study to look at those other infrastructure and impacts. And so we won't be able to likely capture everything in our federal project, but there is a parallel effort going on to identify those under different authorities, whether it's water supply, water quality, stormwater management, and those types of opportunities that's going on in that parallel effort.
Does anyone else want to comment on that question before we move on to the next one? Okay, great. Steve, it looks like you have a couple of questions in the chat and you have your hand raised. Would you like to unmute and make a comment? Question?
Hi, thank you for this presentation. Just a quick question and two quick comments. Are you considering, to Jeff, are you considering the barrier concept being proposed by Boston Water and Sewer at the Northern Avenue Bridge, which I understand would capture up to 10% of runoff within the 4-point channel? That was one question. And then also regarding the timeline, I see Paul Kirshen on this call, and these conversations date back probably 20 years in terms of studies of inundation. And I wonder if there's an increasing risk as the timeline moves out to just being inundated by an unforeseen storm event like Sandy, Boston being hit by an event, somehow lighting a fire under that kind of timeline and implementation. And lastly, on funding, it might have been answered already, but a question about whether the city is expected to plan ahead and cough up funding for mitigation projects on a large scale at some level to match the federal funding. And to that degree, I've asked for a number of years for contributions in value capture from development in flood zones to put toward a future funding, of those kind of projects. I know that's a lot of questions, but if you could tackle any of those, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Great questions. Really appreciate them. Jeff, did you want to jump in first and then we can move to our team?
Yeah. I'm going to stick to the first question, which is probably I'm most qualified to answer. And that is Charlie Jewell and the Boston Water Sewer Commission has shared with us their concept for the harbor barrier at the 4-point channel. And so we are looking in that, and we will continue to look at that. Beyond the stormwater possibilities and opportunities there, we have to look at it from a very comprehensive perspective, and that includes with sea level change, and you put a barrier there, how often does the barrier now have to be closed and regulated, and how is that going to impact natural resources? How's that going to impact the fact that it's a navigable channel for recreation vessels? When it's closed for an extratropical event, and maybe it's, I will tell you that, are we considering tropical events like Sandy? Absolutely. But the bigger concern for us and what we have seen is extratropical events that don't just sit on top of the city of Boston for 12 or 24 hours, but 3 to 4 days and just inundate the city with precipitation and high surge events. And so if we construct something like that, do we still need to put up flood walls and flood barriers around 4-point channel? Will we need a pump station in addition to that? And if you have one pump station, what is your resiliency? Do you need multiple pump stations? So there's a lot of considerations that we need to look at beyond just a barrier solution, but we are absolutely looking at that and looking at the opportunity and the costs associated with such a solution. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Allison to discuss some of the other questions.
Sure. And Steve, I think your questions were about cost share broadly. Were those the follow-up? So for this study, the study is cost shared 50-50 with the Army Corps, and the city is already committed to that in our capital budget. So the study is funded and moving forward in partnership. In the longer term, when we unlock federal sort of congressional appropriation and federal authorization, one of the great opportunities there is that it unlocks a large fraction of federal cost share to support these projects. So there will be city and other non-federal partners that will be contributing to each of those projects. But what is so powerful is that the majority of that funding then for those projects can come through the federal partnership, and that will allow us to do more. So we're happy for that partnership and that opportunity.
Fantastic. Thanks. Any other responses to that question? Series of questions. Okay, great. Phil, do you want to unmute and ask a question or make a comment?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. Yeah, I think a lot of very good presentations. I have to say one thing to Jeff. My image of the Army Corps was a bunch of guys in green running around in yellow bulldozers making concrete somewhere where nobody wanted it. So it's good to hear that there are a lot of people, and good to see a face on the machinery that's sort of in the back of my mind. Actually, a little bit fearful about, what an Army Corps would do whenever they're involved in a presentation. Some of us connect that to permitting, because we all think like permitting locally, permitting from the state, and then the Army Corps, are they going to come in and put a lot of concrete where we want nature-based solutions? So I think the discussion is a good one. There's a lot of talent here. There's a very good presentation, a lot of good work already. Obviously, some of it can be updated and whatnot, and then the audience will get more diverse as we go through this. But I guess my question unanswered yet is, the DPA is an area of real concern here that we have to deal with in Central Square, which I'm glad you mentioned, because we're not going to have plans in place and things built in 2030 when a Superstorm Sandy will go into the tunnel. And that has all the impacts that, everybody has enunciated. So how are we going to deal with that when CZM has just issued a 5-year harbor plan, which restricts any planning of that? And I know some people may not want to change it. I recognize that maybe more of us do, for all the reasons that we can check off. So I have a real concern that we can't get there fast enough with that, and particularly with this one in place. I don't see how the intersection is going to take place, and we can actually plan for that when they're there already, and in another place as well. But I think that's a particular concern for many of us in East Boston. Thank you.
And the DPA program is managed by Office of Coastal Zone Management, as you mentioned, Phil, and they have participated in this process and are part of the broader state Army Corps process. DPA regs don't preclude flood defense mechanisms, just a different form of it. In our engagement, since October, Massport's been involved, including Conley, Moran Terminal, the Autoport, the airport, which just calls for different types of infrastructure. So it doesn't necessarily preclude, flood defense mechanisms in DPAs, but, for areas in East Boston, there's a stronger preference for a natural deindustrialized shoreline. And I think we want to look at options that may be allowed in the DPA, but also advances the community's desire for softer solutions. And many of these things are near-term flood paths that require immediate attention, not necessarily to this Army Corps partnership, but through partnerships with the state and FEMA in the city.
Any more comments on that question? Great. Okay, thanks for the question and responses. It looks like we have a question from Paul Kirshen about gentrification. Paul, would you like to unmute and make your question or comment?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. Just trying to show myself. Whoops, I'm somewhere in here. I know where I am. Okay. So I just came back from running, so I just got a sweatshirt on. it's well documented that as an area gets greener and more resilient, in a low income area, it drives up gentrification. And I think that's going to be explicitly examined in this study, particularly in areas like East Boston. So that's sort of one question. And the other is a comment to Steve's concern about extreme events like Sandy. So a Sandy event, I think striking Boston, has a probability in any 1 year of occurring of like 1/500 or 1/1000. But I assume in the Corps' economic analysis, they'll be looking at the whole spectrum of various frequencies of events. But my question is about how are you going to factor in this gentrification problem?
Yeah, Hannah, if I could, I'd like to start with that, and then I'll pass it off to Allison and Rich. First of all, you are 100% correct, and I think that's one of the reasons we have seen significant change and leadership from both the White House administration, but also from Congress and USACE, because if you look historically, a lot of these areas have become gentrified and disproportionate impacts to those socially vulnerable communities. And so under our guidance and then under our process, we call them other social effects. And so while we do not specifically target maintaining home value and improving home value of neighborhoods, we absolutely consider the long-term impacts to that community. And so a prime example of that would be in Charlestown, adjacent to the Little Mystic River, as well as the Naval Shipyard area and in the Dorchester area, that you don't want to come in and put all this green space and create parks and beautiful area just to disproportionately push the socially vulnerable community out. And so we have specific policies and processes, and a lot of that is going to be tied to your participation, not you specifically, Paul, but to this audience and to this group, because we count on a lot of the input from you, because we can't meet with 635,000 different people to see what the individual impacts are. And so as we present recommendations and as we show you what the results of our science and engineering are showing us, we need to understand what are those intangible things that we can't see so that we can consider those throughout this process, which is why we want to start engaging you in 2023 for a project that won't be finalized until 2026. So I appreciate the comment, and I think it's something that everybody in this audience needs to keep in mind and continue to reiterate throughout this entire study process, because we count on your input to speak for those who may not have a voice.
Sorry, one more comment. I mean, this seems like a perfectly designed multiple objective study, and I give Jeff and the Corps a tremendous credit for doing that. And the challenge is actually doing it. But I think the study design you have is really, really strong, and I think we all look forward to supporting you in this. So thank you and the city for working for putting this partnership together.
Thanks for those questions and comments. Does anyone else want to make a comment on that topic?
I think we'll just add, I think you all well know that we have a number of really robust engagements and designs happening around new missions around the city to truly embed affordability, equity, and resilience into all of our planning and make sure that we are embracing and moving those priorities forward in all of the work that we're doing. And we're very aware of how tied they can be and how tied they must be, so that we're designing homes that people can afford to live in resilient communities. So we'll continue much discussion on that throughout this process and many other processes across the city.
Fantastic, thank you. Alice, would you like to unmute and make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. This has been a very informative presentation. I think also, some of us were in the regional study meeting a couple of weeks ago, and so to really see the difference. I have two questions that have come up through this conversation. One was all the ongoing projects that were discussed at the beginning. I didn't know if any of the findings of this study would impact how they move forward. Thinking about Moakley Park in particular, right? It's many, many phases. How do you anticipate this study what happens if the study discovers something and you're like, yeah, we have to stop and redo the berm, or like sort of what that looks like. So that is one kind of question. And then the other one that really resonated, Rich made the point that managed retreat is something that we're really focused on when there's a repeated loss. And like you said, Rich, there's not a lot of houses that are consistently being inundated and, you know, maybe need to be removed. But what there are roadways that are flooding on a regular basis, like Morrissey. Is removing Morrissey a possibility, or is it simply an effort to elevate Morrissey?
So I will jump in on the first piece and then I'll pass it over to Rich. So I think around Moakley, very good question, and a thing we're looking at carefully in Moakley, but also in other places across the city where we're advancing projects along near-term flood pathways. We're very aware that there's a lot of projects to happen and a lot of projects that need to happen to address nearer term flood pathways that will not wait for this study. So this will always be a balance of projects that the city is moving forward now and projects that we're unlocking at scale for the medium and long term through this effort. So we're going to keep in tight connection, but we're moving those projects forward. And then we're looking at how do we design to complement, enhance, further make adaptable over the long term those projects throughout this study.
And, you know, we're also, you know, make sure we're in alignment with the flood risk modeling that the Army Corps, the federal government is utilizing. So, you know, the things we're building now are, you know, at the same level needed, you know, when an Army Corps may step in the future. So, you know, just being in alignment in the flood risk modeling is critical. And I believe we're there. And then just on Morrissey Boulevard and other roadways that are being compromised, you know, these are evacuation routes. They serve communities that we're not, you know, withdrawing from, so they're needed. So they need to be either elevated on their own or protected through shoreline mechanisms. Morrissey Boulevard, there's a study underway jointly funded by the city, DCR and MassDOT that's looking at the roadway, preserving the roadway, but also, you know, can it act as a barrier for the inland neighborhoods that it abuts.
I'll add, Hannah, to the first part of the question about integrating City of Boston and BPDA efforts into this study and tying it all together. I think it's a very important thing for us to do. So that's why the very first step in the process is identifying the existing conditions. And then over the next year in 2023, not only from the City of Boston and from the state or BPDA side, but also from the private landowners and all the different companies, Gillette and other private landowners that are taking steps and advancing measures to provide community resilience within their different areas. We have to build all of that into our future without project condition and share that across the way, so that way we develop a comprehensive plan and not a plan that creates vulnerability and weak points on particular areas of the project area. So Moakley Park is a great example that you brought up. Ryan's Playground and Straff City Center is another one. Langone Park and Puopolo, that's another. I mean, there's just so many. So if we were to just tell the city, wait, let's stop, go ahead and let us do our study, and then we can focus it, then it's exacerbating the risk. But at the same time, if we just operate in a vacuum and don't try and tie all of this together, we're creating risk as well. So it's definitely a balancing act of identifying ongoing city efforts for now and into the next 10, 15 years versus our project, which is looking at those medium and long-term risks.
And many of these projects are in partnership with FEMA because they're funding Moakley, the 4-point a project in East Boston they're waiting to hear back on. So these projects need to be designed to meet FEMA standards. So we're working off of federal guidance and engineering requirements just through the grant program.
Great, thank you for those questions and comments. I see there's a question in the chat that I think we can just address quickly about whether or not Massport is part of the study. They are engaged as a resource agency along with many other public agencies like the MBTA and others who have, relevant areas and stakes in the study as well. So yes, good question. Massport is engaged. I know there's been a lot of great conversation, a lot of good comments and questions in the chat. I wanted to, I think we've gotten through many of them that are directly related to the study. I wanted to pause and open the floor to see if anyone else has a question that they'd like to unmute or comment and make. Feel free to do so now.
And my last question, I guess now that you've opened about Massport, they have their own resilience plans and needs, and they're an economic engine for the region. And if there's an event, Department of Homeland Security, I think, comes in, takes over, uses it to distribute whatever resources are needed elsewhere. So it would be good to know what plans are there that we can, as the community, can intersect with. Given that we're all dealing offline with, air quality and pollution and things of that nature, but that we're not part of this study necessarily. But I do think it would be good to hear what Massport's up to and how they're protecting their own interests, and do they intersect with the plans that we would like to see happen in the neighborhood? And can they actually elevate, the preservation of tunnels and highways that we actually need for the future as well? Or are they just going to take them over? That's a concern.
I mean, Massport has been engaged in this effort. And, if you look at the evolution of their flood risk modeling and climate resilience work, early on, it's about protecting their assets. But they are engaged with us directly in district-wide recommendations. The airport, there are flood paths through the airport into the neighborhood. And if the airport itself may be designed to be floodable or retrofitted, those flood paths into the neighborhood still need to be addressed, and they are engaged with us on those issues.
Any final questions or comments?
If I may. This is Nasser.
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I already expressed my supportive comments, and thanks to the Corps and everybody else for all the responses to the questions that everybody's posed here. It's not so much well, I guess, anticipating the potential next steps after this study, that there's a lot of new infrastructure that's going to be built. I just wonder, is there a part of this process, maybe internal to the city, where there's a discussion about who operates and maintains this infrastructure, whether that's an existing agency or just a whole smattering of different agencies, both kind of state and local? Because I know the Corps may provide funding for construction, but doesn't provide funding for operations and maintenance generally.
We are having those discussions in the city. Many of these, flood defense actions may be part of public realm, like Moakley Park, Martins Park, which would remain, in the Parks Department's inventory to maintain. 30% of our shoreline is privately owned, so we'll need to engage with private property owners and seek easements or have them assist with us in actions, including along Gillette and the eastern side of the 4-Point Channel. And if you've noticed in the mayor's State of the City speech, and recently in her home rule petition on reorganizing the BPDA, but also moving the planning and urban design department to a city agency, there's a climate resilience sort of readiness team that's been proposed. And that would be a team that would do grant readiness. So moving beyond the neighborhood resilience plans that have been just completed to a level of design that the community supports, but it also allows us to make these projects eligible for funding, and also get into the discussion of long-term care and maintenance, which are part of the requirements of FEMA. So that may be something that this reimagined BPDA city department would take on those. But for properties in DCR's inventory, MassDOT, MBTA's, they would remain sort of responsible for what they're building, but we all need to be working off the same storm risk scenarios so that if there are deployables that need to be mobilized, that we're all working off the same metrics. We're doing the same drills. We know where the deployables are located. So, that coordination needs to continue to mature. But I think there's some good steps moving.
Great, thank you. There is a follow-up question in the chat about who stores, maintains, and deploys flood barriers. Someone from the city want to comment on that?
That great question, Tom, because deployables, are interim measures, but will be also part of long-term projects. I mean, these are fixed, heavily designed structures, but may be required to allow access to the water's edge, to nearby roadways. We're working on a deployable policy. So if there are various departments that are responsible for a deployable, that we're working off of the same storm risk scenarios, if there's a northeast storm coming, when are they deployed, where are they stored, that there are drills put in place, working with the Office of Emergency Management. Collectively, we all meet monthly to talk about these things. But we, as part of the grant requirements, we'll have to have a plan in place, but the city is looking as a whole on this issue.
All right, well, it sounds like there might not be any more comments for now. So we wanted to wrap up, acknowledging that there's just 5 minutes left. We want to say a really big thank you to everyone for participating, for all of your comments and your questions. We want to say thanks to the Army Corps team as well for the presentation and being engaged with all of you. So I am the main project manager from the city side. You are welcome to contact me at any time. We also have a public website. The Army Corps has a website. And we also have a feedback and engagement form on that site as well. So all of these resources we will share with you in a follow-up after this meeting. And as you said, this is really the first of many engagements and efforts, and we look forward to continuing to stay in close coordination and partnership with you all moving forward. So thank you again. I just want to pause and see, Allison, do you want to say any concluding remarks, or Rich?
Just that we'll host some office hours over the next 2 weeks. I think the first one being on February 9th from 6 to 7 p.m. February 10th from noon to 1, and February 17th from noon to 1. I will post these dates and also the links to the Zoom sessions on the project webpage. And I think, Hannah, we're going to follow up with an email with the folks that are on this call as well, with these links and additional information. And the project team, the city team, but also I think Jeff and his team will be available during these office hours. Thank you.
Just
thank you, Rich.
Another big thank you to everyone, and looking forward to this and our many other processes together. So have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.